So let's start our webinar 2, the second webinar of a series of 5 webinars about the research process. And this one is about the research design. Okay. And before entering into the content of today, I would like first to thank 3 associations that are supporting this series of webinars. The first one is Maera and the Knowledge Arena on Management, Accounting, Education and Research of this Maera Association. Also the EAPRIL Association and the Space Network. And before entering in the contents, just let me introduce myself. My name is Anabela Mesquita, and my background is in information systems and technologies. I am a professor at the Polytechnic of Porto, in Portugal. I'm the editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Technology and Human Interaction, and also the associate editor for the Information Resources Management Journal and the Journal of Cases in Information Technology. Besides that, I'm the president of the Space Network, and I have experience in participating both as partner and coordinator in European projects. And let's see now the learning objectives that were selected for this webinar. At the end of this webinar, we expect that you are able to select a research strategy for your research, to define the research design, to select the method to gather data, and understand how data will be analyzed. And what is this research design? What is research design? The research design is the framework of strategies, methods, and techniques chosen by a researcher to combine various components of research in a logical manner in order to handle the research problem and answer the research questions. It provides insights about how to conduct research using a particular methodology. It constitutes the blueprint for the collection, measurement, and analysis of data. And the research design determine the type of design, and research problem, determine the type of design you can use and not the other way around. And we will come back to this question that is a really tricky one and where students mostly have problems. So what is the function of the research design? It ensures that evidence obtained enables to address the research problem. And usually it starts by specifying the type of evidence needed to test a theory, to evaluate a program, or to describe a phenomenon. However, researchers can often begin their investigations far too early before they have thought critically about what information is required to answer the study's research questions. So never forget that the first step in order to determine the design of your research is to have a robust research question. And without attending to these design issues beforehand, the conclusions drawn at the end of your research risk being weak and unconvincing, and consequently will fail to adequately address the overall research problem. Given this, the length and complexity of research designs can vary considerably, but any design will do the following things. So let's see. The first one is to identify the research problem clearly and justify its selection. And this topic was discussed in the webinar number 1. Then review previously the published literature associated with the problem area. The third step is to clearly and explicitly specify hypotheses or let's say the research questions that are central to the problem selected. The fourth step is to effectively describe the data which will be necessary for an adequate test of the hypothesis and explain how such data will be obtained. And finally, describe the methods of analysis which will be applied to the data in determining whether or not the hypotheses are true or false. The research design can be either theoretical or empirical. And when we say theoretical, so the theoretical research focus on the analysis and reflection of secondary data, and meaning the concepts, the ideas and studies that were already published and were carried out by other researchers. So these kind of studies seek a new and better or more complete explanation of the factors or the involved relations. While the empirical research involves the acquisition of primary data, meaning the acquisition of data that answers directly the research question that we are dealing with. So it requires the interactions with people and or organizations. And besides that, we can have two different approaches to our research. And I'm just putting here in this slide two of them that are the mostly well-known approaches. But of course, there are others. But just for understanding what we mean, I'm just talking about the positivism and the interpretativism. So the positivism is similar to the methods used in natural sciences. Also uses most of the time quantitative methods, and here the researcher can be described as being a very objective person, meaning that when he studies a phenomenon, this phenomenon can be seen as completely independent from the researcher. So there's the researcher and the phenomenon, and there's no possibility of the researcher to interfere in the object being under study. The purpose is to establish general laws. The problems can also be reduced to small components in order to be manageable. Data and values are independent from the researchers, and this is why it is possible to do the research in an objective way. The potential hypotheses derive from a deduction of scientific theories that are established to be empirically tested, and only observable phenomena that can be measured or counted are considered as data. On the other side, we have the interpretativism. So here, the researcher is not objective, or neither can be, in the sense that the purpose is to provide a deep understanding of the world and the subjects that are under research. So this means that the researcher is completely immersed in the phenomenon or the situation that is under study. Usually, researchers in this case use small samples that are selected deliberately, and the gathering of evidences implies a close contact between the researcher and the subject of the research. The evidences are very detailed, they are very comprehensive, complete and rich in information, and generally it is used in inductive research, meaning from the data to the theory. So we have here two different philosophies of looking into the research. Let's see now the development of the research design. The research design implies some decisions. First one is which data are necessary to answer my question, how will this data be collected, and what kind of analysis will the researcher do with this data. So this must be decided beforehand. And according to my experience with my students, it's most of the time the students gather data, and only afterwards, when they have data, they will see how the data will be analyzed. So everything must be thought beforehand, before going to the situation, to the context, or before collecting the data. The most common designs are those that you can see here in the slide. Of course, there are more, and if you pick up a book of research dealing with the research process, you will probably see more research designs, but these are the most common ones. And in a few minutes, I will explain you in detail what is meant by each one. Also here you have the most common data gathering methods. So these are the questionnaires, the interviews, the focus group, the observation, and the documental analysis. And finally, the way to analyze data, the most commons, is the quantitative approach and the qualitative approach. I will show you now in detail these research designs. Let's start with the experimental research design. So this kind of research design, the studies are mostly about cause and effect. And the objective, when we use this kind of design, the objective is to prove that there is a causal relationship between one factor and one observed result. And it can be formulated as the X factor provokes the result A. It can also be used to test an idea, a treatment, a program, to see if these make any different. And in this case, in the experimental design, usually there is a control group and a test group. And individuals are randomly assigned to the two groups. One group gets the treatment, meaning this is the test group, and the other one is the control group that does not get the treatment. There is also a pre and a post-test for both groups in a traditional experimental design. And at the end, it is possible to see if the treatment or if the approach or if the intervention in that test group had an effect or not. And here, hypotheses are formulated through the use of dependent and independent variables. But you need to pay attention that one experience never proves that one factor provokes one determined factor. So what we can say is that the experiment can only support the tendency. And even these kind of statements can only be said after some experiments that show that there is a tendency in that direction. So you can use expressions such as, it seems that the experiment is provoking that kind of tendency. Anyway, it is necessary to control other factors that might also interfere in the final result. And here you have an example of a research question that can be used in this kind of studies. For instance, does student-centered pedagogical approaches produce better results than traditional approaches? And this means that I could have two classes, and in one I would use a traditional approach, while in the other one I would use the different approach, the new one. Then we have the exploratory research design. And it is conducted when there are few or no earlier studies to refer to. The focus is on gaining insights and familiarity for later investigation, or undertaken when problems are in a preliminary stage of investigation. And the goals of exploratory research are intended to produce the following possible insights. For instance, to become familiar with basic details, settings, and concerns, to have a well-rounded picture of the situation that is being developed, to generate new ideas and assumptions, the development of tentative theories or hypotheses, to determine about whether a study is feasible in the future, and issues get refined for more systematic investigation and formulation of new research questions, and also point direction for future research and techniques. An example of a study that could be exploratory is the one that you have here in the slide. So gaining insight about the role of leadership women to inspire and motivate other women to become more active in the business world. As far as the action research is concerned, this design follows a characteristic cycle whereby initially an exploratory stance is adopted, where an understanding of the problem is developed and plans are made for some form of interventionary strategy. Then the intervention is carried out, during which time observations are collected in different forms. And the new interventional strategies are carried out, so this corresponds to the action, and the cycle process repeats, continue until a sufficient understanding of the problem is achieved. The protocol is iterative or cyclical in nature and is intended to foster deeper understanding of a given situation, starting with conceptualizing and particularizing the problem and moving through several interventions and evaluations. And one possible question could be this: how can my students learn better and have better grades? This means that I can analyze the situation, see how my students are, think about possible ways to act in order to improve the grades of my students, to intervene in this situation, to reflect about the results, and then to prepare a second cycle where I would incorporate the lessons learned in that cycle. Now we have the case studies, and in the case studies, empirical inquiry, it corresponds to an empirical inquiry that investigates a contemporary phenomenon when within its real-life context. And we use case studies when the boundaries between the phenomenon and the context are not clearly evident, and in which multiple sources of evidence are used. It is particularly valuable in answering the who, why, and how questions in management research. So when our research question starts with who, why, and how, this means that probably we should use a case study. Case studies also allows the researchers to focus in certain aspects with objective to identify interactive processes that can be crucial, but that are not transparent, neither emerge in a big-scale survey. The aim is to provide a multidimensional image of the situation and may illustrate relations, patterns of influence in specific contexts. And here you have a possible question that can lead to case study research design. So what is the impact of a certain information system in a company in terms of knowledge management? The next research design is ethnography. Ethnography implies that research becomes part of the tribe and participates completely in that society. And here researchers acquire knowledge through the lived experience with the group under study. It is clearly interpretative, and it is not easily replicable, and of course it is longitudinal. As far as the phenomenology is concerned, this is a research strategy that focuses on the perception and experience of people, as well as in their feelings and emotions. The objective is not to establish a cause and effect relationship or describe a population through statistical means. No, on the contrary, it intends to describe and understand the experience lived by the people in that group or in that situation. And the most important method to get the data here is the interview. And here you have an example about a possible research question that could lead to this kind of research design. Example, understanding what it means for a person to lose someone. It is about understanding the essence or the meaning of this experience. As for grounded theory, it tries to develop theories through data analysis. It doesn't start with hypotheses to be tested, but with data that represents the starting point to generate the theory. It is very useful for exploratory studies, and the sample of the grounded theory can be developed or created as the work progresses. The collection of data is continuous and will happen till the sample objects provide no more clues or no more ideas. So we keep on going with the research and with the collection of data till the moment we realize that no more ideas, no more situations appear in that research. We can also have the simulation, and in this research design, we try to have studies that imitate reality. They are very useful to train people, but can also be used to make forecasts of complex systems. So we can reduce complexity to a model or to a more easier way to deal with the complex world. We will see now the methods to collect the data. And the first one that I will talk about are the questionnaires. So the questionnaires is a document containing a list of questions. I will not go into detail about the type of questions, but you have just a general idea that questionnaires contain a list of questions. And through this kind of document, data can be collected and then analyzed and interpreted. And usually it is used to obtain superficial and not ambiguous information. The next method are the interviews. And here we have a communication between the researcher and the respondent, during which the researcher controls the agenda by asking some questions that are related to a script that the researcher has prepared, and this script most of the times emerge from the literature review. So questionnaires, while questionnaires are used to collect superficial data, interviews are used to collect more complex and more sensitive data, meaning that we go deeper into the question. And they can also be used to extract emotions, attitudes, opinions, and experiences from the respondents. In the focus group, we have an interviewing group, and here the participants discuss a specific topic. And the objective is to understand and interpret one topic, taking into consideration the different perspectives provided by the participants. And the fact that there are some different participants interacting allows them to be more creative and discuss the topic in deepness. Then we have the observation, and here the data collected is collected from the observation of a phenomenon. Usually we have a template with some issues that reminds us what we have to consider when taking notes. And at the end of the day or at the end of the data collection, we interpret those notes that we have collected. But of course, all those notes need to be always very objective and concrete. And we have also the document analysis. And here the document constitutes an alternative source of information. Usually they have more textual data, but they can also have photos, images, audio, and video. This means that my sources or the format of my data can be very heterogeneous, and it doesn't need to be always text. So please bear that in mind. And one of the most important problems of this technique, the technique of documental analysis, is related with the assessment of the credibility of the documents, meaning to determine if the documents are real, they are authentic, they are correct, and they are not biased. And let's see now the data analysis. I will not go in very detail about quantitative and qualitative methods, but this is just for you to see that all these aspects must be considered when you are designing your research. So here in the quantitative methods, we put an emphasis on objective measurement and numerical analysis of data collected through polls, questionnaires, or surveys. It also focuses on gathering numerical data and generalizing it across groups of people. And here you have the main characteristics of the quantitative data. But before describing the main characteristics of it, let me just say that the goal of this quantitative data is to determine the relationship between one thing, meaning the independent variable, and another thing that is a dependent or an outcome variable in a population. And it can be either descriptive, meaning that subjects usually are measured once, or experimental, and subjects can be measured before and after a treatment. Remember when I told you about experimental design, that in that situation, I could have pre and post-test, and the post-test in the design research. And this is what I mean now here. A descriptive study establishes only associations between variables, while an experiment establishes also the causality. And quantitative research deals in numbers, logic, and objective, focusing on logic, numbers, and unchanging static data, and detailed convergent reasoning rather than divergent reasoning. And the characteristics of the quantitative approach is this. The data is usually gathered using more structured research instruments. The results are based on larger sample sizes that are representative of the population. The research study can usually be replicated or repeated given its high reliability. The researcher has a clearly defined research question to which objective answers are sought. All aspects of the study are carefully designed before data is collected. Data are in the form of numbers and statistics. The project will be used to generalize concepts more widely to predict future results or investigate causal relationships. And the researcher uses tools such as questionnaire or equipment to collect the data. As for the qualitative methods, the emphasis are on the qualities of entities and on processes and meanings that are not experimentally examined or measured. Qualitative researchers also stress the socially constructed nature of reality, the intimate relationship between the researcher and what is studied, and the situational constraints that shape inquiry. They emphasize the value-laden nature of inquiry. They seek answers to questions that stress how social experience is created and given meaning. And in contrast, quantitative studies emphasize the measurement and analysis of causal relationship between variables and not processes. This means that when I use a qualitative method, I want to understand and know the qualities. I understand the thoughts, I'm not looking for a measure, I'm not looking for percentage, for quantity, for amounts, for intensities or frequency. What I want is to see the how and why this situation is happening. So meaning that in any context that can be socially constructed, I cannot measure if the person is happy in a 9 or 10 points, or is feeling well in a 2 or 3 points. So I want to understand why that person is happy, why that person is satisfied, and not in terms of quantity. The methods used to collect data in the qualitative methods are usually the observations, the interviews that can capture direct quotations about people's personal perspectives and experiences, the case studies, and even the document review. Also, I can collect data through the personal experience and engagement of the participants, and this means that I need to have a direct contact with those participants and get close to the people, to the situation and the phenomenon under study. It also implies that there is a need of an empathic neutrality, and this means that each interviewer needs to have some kind of openness, sensitivity, respect, awareness, responsiveness in order to be able to interview the person that is in front of him. And also, there's a need to pay attention to the dynamic of the system. So there's an attention to the process. We have to be aware that while doing the interview, there is a change that is ongoing. This is a process, and the interviewer needs to pay attention to the needs, to the feelings, and to the behavior of the interviewee. I would like to show you this image. Probably you already know it, but I like to use it with my students. This is the Saunders Research Onion. And using this, you can understand the relationship between all the aspects that I described in this webinar. So here you can see that there are the philosophies, that is the outlayer of this onion. And in these philosophies, I talked about the interpretativism and the positivism. But you can see there are other kind of philosophies. I've just mentioned the two most important ones. Then you have the approaches, the approach of research design, and this can be deductive and also inductive. And after that, you have the strategies. I've mentioned some of these, but probably you will see more in any book of research process. There are other research designs, but these are the most important ones, or at least the most used ones in research. Then you have the choices that can be a mono method, a multi-method, or mixed methods. You can also have the time horizons. It can be a cross-sectional research or a longitudinal one. And finally, you have the data collection and data analysis. So before moving to your field of research, to the field or to do your empirical research, you need to give a thought of all of these items in order to be aware and to be able to adapt and to collect the correct data for your research question and to know how to analyze it. And just before ending, I would like to give you or to let you hear with some references. And all these references will be available in the handouts that you will receive afterwards, after the end of this webinar. So just before asking if you have any questions, I would like to let you know that the next webinar will be about literature review. It will take place 29th April at 3 p.m. GMT time, and it will be led by my colleague, Professor Pauline Silva. And now, if you have questions, please just let me know, and you can write the questions in the chat, and I will be delighted to answer them. Do you have any questions? I don't see that you have questions. I hope to have given you an idea about the possible and different research designs. And if you have questions, even if it is not here in the chat, you can anyway email me, and I will be delighted to answer your questions. Again, thank you very much for your participation in this webinar, and see you in the next one on the 29th April, 3 p.m. about literature review. Thank you very much.